Please subscribe to the Berkshire Heroes channel. Have you clicked that button yet? Pressed it? Thank you so much. Now on with the show. I'm Laura Blumenthal on the Berkshire Heroes podcast, and joining me today is Niki McGlynn, a local business owner. Welcome, Niki.
Hi, Laura.
Now, you are a local therapist and coach helping people who are neurodivergent. You've got your own business called The Organised Mind, and you also advise businesses so they can get the best out of their neurodiverse workforce. But start off by telling me, what about you? What's been your personal journey when it comes to neurodiversity, and what made you decide to start up Organised Mind?
I think fairly typically for a lot of women of a certain age, I didn't really discover that I was neurodivergent until my daughter got a diagnosis. So that seems to be a fairly typical process that people go through. Until very recently, women weren't ever considered to have ADHD. When I was at school, actually, a lot of people didn't think dyslexia was a thing. So I limped through school with dyslexia. My daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia at 12. So I didn't want her to have the same experience of school that I'd had. So that was when I started looking for something that would particularly help her. And that's when I discovered this whole world of primitive reflexes and how they affect people, particularly people who are neurodivergent. So that really sort of started that whole journey. Then latterly she was diagnosed with ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD. So yeah, that was really my big inspiration. And the thing about understanding about primitive reflexes is that where we're struggling with the things that neurodivergent people struggle with, so focus and attention, concentration, anxiety, sensory processing issues, by working with primitive reflexes, all of those symptoms can improve. So it's not a cure. Obviously, neurodivergent people don't need curing, whatever they think in America, but they can be difficult conditions to live with in sort of normal society. So being able to work with reflexes using movement, because primitive reflexes are a reflexive movement pattern. So we can use movement, improve function, and it works for children, but it also works for adults. And this is where it helps to support businesses.
Niki, I've got to ask, what are primitive reflexes?
So primitive reflexes are movement patterns that all babies make. And it's a sort of a coverall term for primitive reflexes which start during pregnancy and develop and then should integrate into the central nervous system after birth. And then there are also transitional reflexes which do a similar job but start after birth and integrate into the system, and postural reflexes, which are the things that enable you to be upright and function in the world. So if those primitive reflexes stay active, or we call them retained, then those reflexes then have physical, mental and emotional components to them. So for instance, if you've got a child who can't sit still, or an adult, this applies to adults as well. So if you've got somebody who can't sit still, who's very fidgety, who's very talkative, who's very jumpy, who struggles with labels and things around their waist, then they may very well have a retained spinal reflex. So it's kind of looking at how those reflexes affect people. And because they're movement patterns, because they're the movements that babies make, if they get stuck in the system, we can encourage them to integrate using movement.
And do we know why some people that is retained?
Some people, there's a genetic predisposition. So, like with neurodiversity, there is a genetic predisposition to have a brain that works in a certain way. But sometimes difficult birth, cesarean birth, very fast birth can cause a problem. Sometimes trauma during pregnancy or after delivery, if a baby's born and they run into problems very early on, then all of those things can sort of lead towards reflexes not integrating as they should.
It feels as if ADHD is in the news quite a lot, but yeah. I count myself as someone, like a lot of people, that feel very ignorant about it. So can you tell me, what is ADHD and how does it affect people, their everyday lives, and how can we go about supporting those in our lives who may have it, including colleagues?
So ADHD, I think, is very much in the news, partly because until very recently, ADHD didn't exist in women. It was only something that affected young boys, and you grew out of it. And we know now that none of those things are true. But there was a lot of research, or there's a big research project in Berkeley University in America in 2021. And that was really when they identified how ADHD appears in women and girls. So that's really created an ability for women who had been sidelined and struggled, and young girls, to then be able to identify what their symptoms were, identify those as ADHD and get a diagnosis. So all of a sudden, you've got sort of 5 or 6% of 50% of the population now able to have a diagnosis. So that's a huge explosion in diagnoses. And also there's a better understanding of ADHD. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder. And there are 3 main presentations of ADHD. ADHD hyperactive, which is your sort of what we typically think of as ADHD. So people who really can't sit still and struggle and are restless. ADHD inattentive, which tends to be more common in girls, but not exclusively, which is where the hyperactivity is internal. So they might look like they're not doing anything, or they're daydreaming. Daydreaming, I was a big daydreamer. So that sort of daydreamy thing where actually the brain is going really, really fast, but the body isn't keeping up, all combined. So sometimes you're a bit hyperactive and sometimes you're a bit inattentive. So really it's that feeling that there is constantly movement going on, whether it's internal or external, and then that interferes with our ability to focus and concentrate, process information, and general issues around executive function skills. So executive function are the functions you need to execute your life. So like we said, organisation, focus, attention, understanding how you are, being able to use good working memory, so not forgetting things all the time, not losing things all the time. So there's lots and lots of moving parts to ADHD. One of the biggest issues for people with ADHD is something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which, because children with ADHD are told off about 20,000 times more than your neurotypical child, people internalise a sense of being criticised or not being welcome. So that causes lots of problems through school, but also into adults. This sort of sense that people don't really like you, they don't really want you around, that you're being criticised unnecessarily. So often when people are sort of accused of being oversensitive, that oversensitivity comes from that place of being constantly told off.
And I know that you had a very late diagnosis.
Yeah.
And what was it in your life that made you think, I need to get checked out for this? I experience life very differently to others. Was it that great sense of restlessness that you talked about, or was it something else?
I think it was my daughter getting a diagnosis and working with lots of people who have ADHD or ADHD and autism, ADHD and dyslexia. And it just became increasingly obvious that this was probably the root cause of a lot of my issues. So yeah, that sort of restlessness, problems with focus and attention, problems with procrastination, that sort of really wanting to be able to get on and do something, but kind of not being able to make yourself. It was really just to understand myself better. I had such an awful time at school and really struggled with so many things, and it was kind of nice to go, oh, okay, maybe it's not just that, all of those criticisms that get thrown at you, being stupid or lazy or disorganized, and actually there's a reason for it.
And I think of at my workplace, I've got a woman I work with, she's very senior, and I never know really, because she's got ADHD, how to work with her the best so she can get the best out of working with me and what I should keep in mind. I've tried reading up on things, but it's all very vague. So what advice would you give to me and others who have colleagues with ADHD to make sure that they feel supported and you're working the best that you can be?
Ask them. One person with ADHD is not the same as the next person with ADHD. So, and what works for one person doesn't work for another person. And people have, and particularly as we get older, we kind of know what will work for us and what isn't helpful. So always, if you work with somebody who's neurodivergent, always ask them what they need or what you can do to support them, or what you need from them for you to be supported. It's not always a one-way street, So often people who are neurodivergent need very, very clear, I was going to say instructions, but that's not the word I mean. But they need to know exactly what's expected of them. They don't do very well often with implied information. So asking is really the best way forward. What can I do? What can I do to support you? What can I do to help you? What do you need from me? And these are the things I need from you. So if you're working with somebody who's a bit chaotic and disorganized, but that's how they produce their best work, but you're somebody who's really, really structured, then you can say to that person, right, I need a lot of structure and I need these deadlines. So can we find a way to work together to make that happen for both of us? So it's really that whole, what we don't see very much of these days is it's about compromise on both sides and understanding where we're both coming from.
And when you think about your experience as a therapist and a coach, can you think of examples where you've thought, I've really helped this person, or you feel like you've given really great advice to a workplace and it's meant that they've really been able to do really good support to their neurodiverse staff?
Well, I've got ADHD, so I don't remember any of those things. But I think generally it's, the people I work with come back, and I think that's probably the best indication that the support I give is helpful and useful. And some of it is just about understanding somebody's workplace, understanding the pressures that they're under, and trying to find a way forwards that is supportive and helpful. So, I've lots of examples of working with children where the children were on the brink of being permanently excluded, and we've been able to turn that around, and they're able to engage better in school and enjoy their schooling, and life becomes much easier for parents. And usually when I work with businesses, I'm invited back. So I think that's probably good enough.
That's always a good sign. Is it mostly parents who get in touch with you so you can support their children, or is it sort of mostly adults who contact you just for advice, just to hear about your personal story and what advice you can give them? And are you finding that more workplaces are approaching you as they realise that they need to be able to get the best out of their staff and they're not entirely sure what the best way to do that?
Yes, definitely. As a therapist working with reflexes, I see mainly children, but often I'll start, a bit like my own story, I'll start off seeing the children and then often will then end up helping the parents, because neurodivergent children will often have neurodivergent parents. But definitely increasingly businesses are realising that understanding their neurodiverse staff is really important. And people who are neurodivergent are really valuable in the workplace. So they tend to be innovative thinkers. They tend to be very resourceful. They will often be really hard workers. They're very loyal. They're very reliable. So there's lots and lots of benefits for employing people who are neurodivergent. Being able to support those people in the workplace then becomes really important. You don't want to have an incredibly creative workforce who you can't retain because you can't support them. You don't want to have a workforce who are really good at detail and unpicking problems, and then find that actually they're off far too often with stress, because a lot of that stress can be managed so that the workplace isn't a stressful environment. Nobody wants to work in a stressful environment. We want to work somewhere where we feel comfortable and happy and valued. So that's really an important thing, I think, for businesses to be aware of.
And what do you wish everyone knew about neurodiversity? What do you think some of the misconceptions are?
I think this idea that, well, currently everybody's a bit ADHD. Prior to that, everybody was a bit on the spectrum, or everybody's a bit OCD. I think that we are all different. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses. But by having this everybody is the same, it sort of dismisses and minimises people's personal experience. But I think, the most important thing is to understand we're all different. We all have a lot to contribute, and don't make assumptions about people.
That's definitely something I'm going to take away. Just, you've got to ask people. I think sometimes people worry, am I going to offend people by asking? But it seems as if there's no harm in asking, if surely you just want to get the best out of the working relationship.
Yeah. Don't assume somebody's neurodivergent. Don't assume that somebody has ADHD or has autism. Don't go, oh, I'm sure that person's a bit autistic, I'll ask them if they want some help. Just, there's ways and ways of asking, and you can ask, how can I best support you? How am I best working with you? What do you need from me to help? Because, some people don't want a diagnosis.
And what advice would you give to people who are neurodivergent so that they can look after themselves, but also communicate proactively to colleagues how they can support them as well?
I think it comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? I think if you think you're neurodivergent, if you think you should have a diagnosis, I used to think that labels were for jam jars, that getting a diagnosis wasn't helpful. But I've completely changed my view on that. And I think because, when I first started working, which is 20 odd years ago, the world was a very different place and people were much less accepting. So I think nowadays, if you think you need a diagnosis or should have a diagnosis, absolutely go and get one. Look at the NHS right to choose. If you go privately, that has repercussions, not just financial. The NHS waiting lists are very long, but there's a midway which is called right to choose. The best advice I've seen on right to choose is on the ADHD UK website. And right to choose is being able to access an NHS service via a private provider. So it speeds the whole process along, makes it all much easier. It's not shared care, it's an NHS service provided by a private organisation. And you have different options. So if you look on the ADHD UK right to choose website, that's absolutely your best option. And I think I think there's a lot of help out there now that there wasn't. So I think listening to podcasts, having a look and seeing what help is available. Obviously, come and see people like me. There's lots of people who work with reflexes around the country. And the simple, obvious things, moving your body is the best thing you can do for your brain. So whatever you're struggling with, if you can get up and move your body, it will help you.
And you mentioned podcasts. Do you have any that you'd recommend?
Oh gosh, there's lots. There's some that are particularly aimed at women. There's some that are aimed at sort of everybody. But I think it's just worth having a look around.
And when you got your diagnosis,
Yeah.
I'm assuming you went for some sort of test. What does the test for ADHD look like? What did you have to do?
So as an adult, it was online, which was fine. I had to do a test where you had to match red and blue circles and squares, which was excruciating. And then questionnaires and information from your childhood. So, all my school reports as a child were all, could try harder, would do better if she didn't chat so much, all the typical things, really. And then an interview with a psychiatrist, which was fine. It was very painless and easy.
So was that online as well, or did
Yeah,
you have to go in
yeah.
person
No,
to see
it's all
them? That was
online.
online too.
All online.
So how long did the whole thing take, all in all?
So the wait is quite long. So I did mine through Right to Choose. My daughter did hers through Right to Choose some years ago. So the wait is quite long. But the actual diagnostic process, the online test is about 20 minutes, and then probably an hour at the most.
And then how quick did you get your diagnosis afterwards?
Straight away.
Oh, okay, that is swift. So how long did you have to wait when you applied to be tested for ADHD to then when you were sitting that 20-minute online test?
About 6 months, I think.
Okay, I see. So you could have a relatively quick turnaround.
Yes.
I mean, it's still a wait. I was interviewing someone with autism, and some of that is for years, he was saying. So that was awful.
Yes, this is why Right to Choose is so helpful, and the wait for an autism diagnosis tends to be less than for an ADHD diagnosis.
I had a colleague in a previous role, and she was neurodiverse, and she just emailed us all the best way to work with her. And I just thought, that's amazingly proactive and really helpful for her as well as us. Is that something you would recommend? Is there anything else that people should do that you think would just make their lives easier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really sensible, proactive, great way of dealing with it. So, but it's a personal choice. Some people don't want to share that information. So I also don't think people should feel obliged to share that information. But I do think we all have an obligation when we work together to make it as easy for everybody to function. So whether you're neurodivergent or whether you're neurotypical, we have to work together. So expressing what we need, we can express what we need without saying, oh, by the way, this is my problem. But if you're somebody who struggles working in a busy office and would benefit from having a desk in a quiet corner, then that should be accommodated without needing to have a piece of paper that says, this is my problem. And similarly, I know when the fashion was for hot desking, that caused a lot of problems for people because you don't know where you're going to be sitting and you can't take any ownership of it, and that uncertainty is really hard to live with. So those kind of things are easy fixes.
And I know that you're Wokingham based, but I'm keen to hear about where people can find your business online and which sort of area do you cover? I assume you cover the whole of Berkshire.
Well, people come from all over to see me, actually. I have people who come from all over the country to see me, which is very flattering. I tend to work face-to-face, but sometimes we can do a bit of a mix of some face-to-face and some online. And businesses, often a lot of that's online, but I have a car, I'm happy to travel, and I teach all over the country. So I teach reflex integration or understanding about primitive reflexes. So I have a course coming up in Bath in October and in Merseyside in November, and in Brighton in the new year. So I'm around.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You're nationwide and a busy bee, Niki. My goodness. And if people Google organised mind,
Yes.
Are they going to find you easily online?
Yes, they Google organised mind with an S. I pop up. there is a book which is Organised Mind with a Z, which isn't me, but yes,
Okay.
I'm Organised Mind with an S.
The English spelling.
English spelling.
The correct way indeed. And my final question to you is, if you're Prime Minister, Niki, what would you change about the UK and why?
I think the education system from the bottom up, absolutely that needs changing, and I think everybody needs screening for retained reflexes, and I think we need to bring movement back into schools, and a lot of the more creative subjects need to come back into schools. We need to move away from this obsession with academia and exams, and really move back to more vocational subjects.
And when it comes to more movement in schools, do you mean more PE, more sort of running around in the gym, or something else?
No, definitely not running around in the gym, but just generally, although nothing wrong with running around in the gym, but generally just more movement. You know, school breaks are very short now. There's very little movement that's advocated in schools, whereas movement builds brains. So if we want our kids to be clever, we need them to be moving. So, you know, we need to be out in playgrounds climbing and swinging and jumping, and, you know, maybe that's not as relevant for older kids, but then, you know, yoga and dance classes. When I was at school, we used to do a dance class once a week. So it's that sort of repetitive patterned movement using the whole body is what makes you clever.
I will definitely take that away for myself as well, because we could all do more when it comes to more movement.
Definitely.
I want to thank you, Niki McGlynn, for joining me on the Berkshire Heroes podcast. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Pleasure, Laura. Thank you.
And please remember to subscribe to the Berkshire Heroes channel.